At their core, novelists are liars. We might dress up our lies in metaphors and carefully structured fictional elements. But the thing which separates storytellers from journalists or historians is that those other writers are, in theory at least, doing their best to reach the factual truth of an event, while authors are attempting to maintain consistency in their narrative, which is predominantly built from lies. The question Alan Wake asks is, what happens when those lies break out of the consensual hallucination of the page and begin to influence reality? This question has always lingered at the periphery of creative circles. Art can shift culture over time as popular works beget imitators. Deeply moving works inspire or incite other creators to respond, and consumers become ever more comfortable with formerly fringe or deep ideas by experiencing them through popular fiction. But Alan Wake asks this question in a more literal way. What happens if the characters and events of a story begin to actually bleed out of the page and into the real world? Can fiction literally become reality? Episode 2 of Alan Wake begins with a flashback that mirrors the events which unfolded at Birdleg Cabin. Alan returns to the fancy apartment that he shares with Alice in New York City to find her happily working on cover layouts and advertisements for The Sudden Stop, which he is hoping to finish writing that evening. They flirt, they chat, they talk about Barry and work until a sudden power outage causes Alice to have a panic attack. As we saw previously, Alan immediately takes action by trying to fix the lights, and then bringing Alice a flashlight when he realizes that the power is out to the whole building. They light candles. They settle in on the sofa to hold one another until the darkness passes. Alice asks Alan to tell her a story to settle her nerves. So he recounts how he was afraid of the dark as a child until his mother gave him an old light switch, which she called the clicker. Any time Alan was afraid of the dark, his mother said, all he needed to do was flip the switch, and it would drive away any monsters that might be nearby. Alice laughs at this, especially when Alan produces the light switch from the shelf under their coffee table. He insists that the story is true. I love you, Alice says, even if you are a liar. The camera then pulls back out of the window, and the scene fades away to darkness on a snowy night in New York. It's easy to presume that the clicker was merely one of thousands of untold stories that linger at the periphery of any relationship, haunting the shadows until they are surfaced by circumstance or necessity. But the way in which the clicker appears in Alan's hand, seemingly for the first time, just when Alice needs a talisman to ward the darkness away, is both a narrative convenience and foreshadowing. Foreshadowing of the power of stories to push away the darkness. Alice is afraid. So Alan tells her a story that may be a deep truth about his childhood, or an off-the-cuff tale based on seeing a bit of old hardware laying on the table. Alan insists that the story is true, but Alice doesn't seem to believe him. And that is fine. She is the one in need of peace, and he is her comforter. Just as many of us find peace in enjoying the fictional comfort of media. Alice finds comfort in Alan's lies, even if they may actually be true. It matters to Alan because this is his personal story. But it doesn't matter to Alice because to her, the story is the point, whether it's true or false. As we return to the present day of Alan Wake, we find Alan being examined by Doc Nelson in the Bright Falls Sheriff Station, and the question of what is true and what is a necessary lie is again at the core of his situation. Alan lies to Doc during the exam, denying the truth of his dark visions, his ongoing pain, and his memory loss. He fears that if he tells the truth, the doctor will send him to the hospital, or he may even be arrested. After all, if our experience of last night is to be believed, Alan has killed several local loggers and Mr. Stuckey, whose gas station is still abandoned. Our gameplay is the story which Alan is experiencing as an unreliable narrator. So while we don't actually kill these people so much as destroy an echo of them that is formed from the darkness that took them, and then shielded them, and then sent them after Alan, we as players are likely unsure how much of our experience is actually real, and what may be the delusions of a depressed writer. The theme is sharpened when we step into the lobby and find Cynthia Weaver flicking the lights on and off, complaining to Deputy Grant that several of the bulbs will need to be replaced soon. Keen-eared players may recall that Cynthia mentioned her concern about the light bulbs at the sheriff's station when we met her back at the Oh Dear Diner. But it's Deputy Grant's words that stick with me from this scene. After the Lady of the Lamp leaves, Grant turns to Alan and explains that Cynthia used to be the editor of the local newspaper, and she was responsible for writing many a wild story about the colorful history of Bright Falls. As a lifetime resident with practical work to attend to, Grant accepts Cynthia's fear of shadows and her obsession with changing light bulbs to ward the dark away as a part of daily life. No more concerning to her than Deputies Thornton and Mulligan bickering over the radio as they report that Stuckey is still missing. Cynthia Weaver is supposed to have been a truth-seeking reporter, but her articles about the town are repeatedly described as exaggerations at a minimum, and her day-to-day existence is one of fear. Local business owners and authorities dismiss and humor her, but don't believe that her obsession with changing light bulbs is necessary. Alan is a professional peddler of lies, forced to keep his wild experience hidden so that he can continue to pursue his perception of the truth. Both of these characters, he who wakes and she who weaves, are reflections of one another. Their connection remains slight at this point in the story. Their meetings so far are only fleeting. But seeing how the townfolk disregard Cynthia surely does little to reassure Alan that his own preternatural experiences will be taken seriously. Passing by a number of missing persons posters, Alan will arrive in Sheriff Sarah Breaker's office, where we receive his freshly charged cell phone before entering a brief cutscene. Alan reveals just enough of the truth to Sheriff Breaker to make her more suspicious, admitting that he was arguing with Alice before she went missing, but in his internal monologue, he makes the same excuses that he made while talking to Doc Nelson. And then, Alan gets a phone call from a man who claims to have kidnapped Alice. He tells Alan to get out of the sheriff's station and look for something he has left in a junked car in the overgrown lot next door. This is where you can either step back into the sheriff's office and make an excuse, or walk right out to the lobby. This is where we as players can choose to make Alan a liar or make him avoid the truth. Here's what I mean. If we step back into Sheriff Breaker's office, Alan will make excuses. He will not outright lie. He will merely say he needs to get some fresh air, and Sheriff Breaker will allow him to go outside, suggesting perhaps that he step into the back parking lot. Whether or not we return to Sheriff Breaker's office, when we go into the lobby, Alan will tell Deputy Grant that Sheriff Breaker has told him he can go out back to get some fresh air. I like to think that this small moment of decision is intentional, allowing us to decide whether Alan is going to check in or walk right out of the station. And either way, he's going to make the same excuse to Deputy Grant, because he doesn't care if he's telling the truth about his conversation with Sheriff Breaker. It's a narrative convenience that Alan's childhood clicker was on the coffee table when Alice asked him to tell her a story 3 years ago. Likewise, it's a narrative convenience that the kidnapper knew Alan had his phone in his hand and called immediately as Alan was talking to Sheriff Breaker. On a surface level, we can accept these sorts of coincidences in the same way that we accept that Stucky, Rose, Rusty, Cynthia, and the Anderson brothers were all at the diner when the Wakes arrived in Bright Falls. But what happens if we look just a little deeper? If we treat these narrative conveniences in a manner similar to those conveniently placed pages from the manuscript for departure, or the televisions which show an episode of Night Springs that feels eerily related to the events of a particular episode that we're playing. We can feel the structure of the story, nudging events into particular paths, and accept that the characters are experiencing narratives which might otherwise feel a little forced. Perhaps I'm being overly generous to the designers at Remedy for what could very well be merely a glitch or efficiency in the use of pre-recorded dialogue lines. After all, Alan could say the same thing to her without it being a deeper level of choice, whether we're treating him as a liar or a truth teller. But consider how much interactivity there is in the dialogue between Alan and Walter, the town drunk. If you stop and talk to him in the cell block on your way out to the back parking lot. He complains about the darkness, about his fear. He begs Alan to turn the lights on. And then if you turn the lights off again, he complains even more. If you never turn the lights on, he has a different set of complaints. There's glitches, yes. There are problems galore. But when it comes to whether Alan is telling the truth or casually lying, I do think this is an opportunity where we as players get to participate in creating the version of the story that we would see Alan do. My point here is that as a video game, Alan Wake gives us the opportunity of interacting with the story to make Alan more or less of a truth teller or a liar based on our actions. The kidnapper has left Alice's driver's license in the junker, and whatever mysterious force has been placing the manuscript pages in Alan's path has also arranged for 2 pages to appear, one near the car and another in the dark cell block. As a character in a narrative video game, Alan is moving rapidly from one motivating event to the next, propelling the player through a series of brief interactions which link or allow participation in scenes which feel staged like those in a novel or a TV show. We know that Alan is an unreliable narrator, and we may be beginning to question whether we as players are acting out the actions described in a novel, or if there is an even deeper level of metafiction at play here. We can especially feel this metafictional layer when Alan returns to the dark cell block to find that Walter is no longer begging for the lights to be turned on. And just like we found in Stucky's gas station, or similar to in the back hall of the Oh Dear Diner, the darkness has allowed the framing story to seep into this layer of reality through an old television. A writer is the light that reveals his story from the darkness, Alan says from the television, which shows him still trapped in the prison of the bird-leg cabin writing room. Anything is possible here, he says. I'll write the story. I'll save her. Just as Alice asked Alan to tell her a story, to pull her out of the darkness-induced panic when the power went out in New York City, the Alan we see on the television is attempting to tell a story to save Alice from the darkness that has captured them both. Anything is possible when you're lying. A writer can conjure anything from that darkness which lingers at the edge of their perception, if they keep trying, if they don't stop creating, if they are willing to allow narrative conveniences and bend the rules of real, true, objective levels of reality to tell a good story. The question we must ask as this tale continues is how many rules you can bend before the story begins to fight back. Thank you for joining me today, folks. I'm Andrew Link, and this has been another episode of my exhaustive analysis of Alan Wake Remastered from Remedy Entertainment. You can find the original scripts for these essays, as well as other articles that I have written, over at my Patreon or andrewlink.com. And I hope you will join me next time as we continue to examine Alan Wake and the tragedy of Rusty.